Quotation. Quotation is a central skill that we use in academic writing along with summary and paraphrase in order to present information to our readers. But unlike summary and paraphrase, we use the author's original words, which means that it does require some separate explanation to follow it whenever you're using it in order to provide information that's proving a point that you're making. So there are four different types of quotations that we're going to commonly use, two major types and then two subskills within that. There are block quotes, there are short quotes, there are ellipsed quotes, and there are bracketed quotes. Usually, you're going to use a signal phrase to introduce your quotation if the author is known within the field that you're writing. So if it's a well-known biologist or behavioral economist or writer or whatever, then you will use a signal phrase before you put in the actual quote itself. And you will start and end the quotation with quotation marks. And of course, anytime you are directly using information from someone else, you are going to cite. It can be a little bit hazy sometimes whether you should do it in summary or paraphrase if it's a commonly known idea, but if you're quoting, always include a citation. So for block quotes, these are quotes that are going to be longer than 3 to 4 lines long or so. You do this whenever you've got a substantial passage that you're planning to analyze in depth in the coming paragraphs. So normally you're going to do this in like longer research papers, or if you're doing direct textual analyses. We do a lot of this in the literature and folklore worlds because we're directly digging into the word choice that's used within a text. Lawyers will do a lot of this too because they're going to be directly parsing like old laws and things like that. If you're just doing a short paper, I strongly recommend against using block quotes just because they take up so much space, and normally that means you're getting into more depth than you need to for a paper that length. And you set off a block quote by indenting it 1 inch on both sides. So here's what that might look like. Behavioral economist and psychologist Dan Gilbert explains one of our most common brushes with the endurance of an enigma, saying filmmakers and novelists often capitalize on this fact by fitting their narratives with mysterious endings, and research shows that people are in fact more likely to keep thinking about a movie when they can't explain what happened to the main character, and if they liked the movie, this morsel of mystery causes them to remain happy longer. So as you can see here, I've got my signal phrase at the very beginning that is flush on the left, just as it would be in a standard paragraph, but then I've moved my block quote over 1 inch on the left, and if I were in a standard word processor, I would have moved it in 1 inch on the right too, but obviously this is a PowerPoint presentation, so that doesn't work. And you'll notice at the end, I've got that citation for the page number of the book that this came from, and pay special attention to that period that comes after the citation, because the citation is a part of the previous sentence. Skill number 2, short quotes. These are complete thoughts that are only 1 or 2 lines long. You do this if the author said something better than you think that you could say it, and it's not going to require significant analysis or explanation. So it's anytime you need to provide external evidence for a claim. And in order to do that, you insert the quote. You can introduce it with a signal phrase, just like with a block quote, but it's not as strictly necessary as with a block quote. It does have to be inside quotation marks, and again, it does have to be followed by a citation. So that's going to look something like this, with a quote from the same book. People in a relationship don't always agree on how an event happened. For example, consider an anecdote from behavioral economist Dan Gilbert. I recently had an argument with my wife, who insisted that I like the movie Schindler's List. Now let me be clear. She was not insisting that I would like the film, or that I should like the film. She was insisting that I do like the film, which we saw together in 1993. And again, you'll notice I've got that citation there at the end for both of these. If you know anything about behavioral economics, then you know the name Dan Gilbert. You might have seen his TED Talk about stumbling on happiness somewhere in there. So that's why I'm including his name in these signal phrases. But if it was just some grad student or somebody that nobody knew from behavioral economics, I might not necessarily have that signal phrase there. Skill number 3 are brackets. This is whenever you're using quotes that need extra information included that are not in the original quote. You would do this normally because the original context clarified some unclear element before the quoted passage begins. So especially if you're pulling a quote from like halfway down a paragraph is whenever that kind of thing is going to happen. Normally that means that there are going to be pronouns appearing in a quoted passage. So these can be personal pronouns like him, her, his, hers. They can be referential pronouns like this and that, or they can be deixis pronouns that differentiate in specific times or places. So here, there, then, that sort of thing. And you do that by taking the unclear element and replacing it with a clearer bracketed phrase. So I'm going to show you the side by side of what the original quote and the modified quote look like on this one. So going back to our example from 1, filmmakers and novelists often capitalize on this fact by fitting their narratives with mysterious endings, and research shows that people are in fact more likely to keep thinking about a movie when they can't explain what happened to the main character. Now in the first quote, time that I used this quote, I used a signal phrase that explained what the this fact was. But if I were dropping it in without that signal phrase, then I would need to clarify what this fact means. So that becomes our lower quote here, where I explained that this fact means the endurance of mysteries in consciousness. And again, both of these, since I didn't have a signal phrase, I had to put the author's last name into the parenthetical citation, which is the Gilbert, and then it came from page 207. Almost done. Skill number 4, ellipses. This is what happens whenever you use quotes that have an extra information that you're omitting from the middle. The original context might include details that don't have anything to do with what you're saying. So a lot of times in academic writing, then authors will go on a digression mid-thought, or they'll explain a particular case that's not really necessary to understand the larger idea that you're presenting. So whenever you're doing that, you take all of that extra information that you don't need and you replace it with an ellipsis. That's what those 3 dots are called. If it's just part of the middle of a sentence, or if you're getting rid of a full sentence, then you're actually going to put in 4 dots to signal that it's a longer omission. So that's going to look like this. I recently had an argument with my wife who insisted I like the movie Schindler's List, blah, blah, blah. Now, if I were using that in a different way, then I could drop out most of that middle stuff and just say, I recently had an argument with my wife who insisted that I like the movie Schindler's List. I do not like Schindler's List. So that's how we use all 4 of our quotation skills.